Right, now let's have a look at how the day was in other counties with Lois Wangui, who has been keeping tabs on the events across the country for us.
In several counties where the youth held anti-finance bill protests on Thursday, it was a mixture of lull and chaos. In Migori, at least 6 people have been injured as protesters engaged the police in running battles.
We have given the government a diplomatic way of intervention, but it cannot work. We are calling for a radical intervention from the youths. Vijana power! Kila kitu yake rudi chini, vijana power!
Businesses along Migori Sirare Highway remained closed for the better part of the day. In Homa Bay County, 8 children were injured as youthful protesters resisted the police efforts to disrupt their activities. The children are currently receiving treatment at the Homa Bay Referral Hospital. Some streets in Homa Bay were rendered impassable and the police had to clear the debris by hand.
As of now, we've received 8 patients. All of them 6 of them gunshot wounds. There are 2 who said they were pushed and a motorbike ran over them. But even as we speak, I have just been called to dispatch an ambulance to pick 3 other people who have also been injured.
In the county of Kisumu, protesters began their march at Kondele and headed to Kisumu State Lodge, where they ran into heavy security detail that pushed them back, thwarting their attempt to enter the protected area.
We have said that we are done with the finance bill. It cannot be taken back to Parliament. We have already lost faith in Parliament. We already gave a no confidence vote on Parliament. It is the same people who brought us here. It can't be that it is the same people who can solve the mess that we are already in.
Uasin Gishu County was largely calm, a sharp contrast from Tuesday's protests, where Eldoret Town participated in the protest vigorously. On Thursday, only heavy security detail was evident in the CBD. Tension arose when a group of pro-government youth marched across Eldoret Town, saying they were in the business of cleaning the town after Tuesday's mayhem. They attracted suspicion, though, seeing as they were armed with clubs. Lois Wangui, NTV.
Now, with Lois' story giving us a picture of what happened outside the capital and the peripheral counties, we now have a conversation with Irungu Houghton, who is the executive director of Amnesty International Kenya. Thank you for joining us, Irungu. And just straight into it, from where you sit, do we have any kind of data that has been collected in regards to the injuries, deaths, and the likes, which is, updated coming off the protests?
Dan, yes, we do. But before I share the data that has been collated by medical doctors and human rights defenders and verified by the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights, I just wanted to say how stunning it is over the last couple of weeks that we have not seen any data produced by the National Police Service or the Interior Ministry that speaks to the injuries, the deaths, the abductions, and also the missing persons that have taken place. Now, for some of us who may be more cynical, the argument could be that why would a government incriminate itself? But I think we have to hold the government accountable to its obligation to protect all citizens, regardless of any specific context. Today, what we've seen essentially is 1 death in Rongai. This is the tragic story that Faith Odhiambo spoke to in the context of the child that was shot severally. We've also seen 90 injuries, and that includes the figures that you've just shared in terms of Homa Bay, but the epicenter really was Nairobi, with about 74 soft tissue and more serious injuries in terms of bystanders and protesters that were beaten. We've seen about 59 arrests in the context of Nairobi. And one peculiar thing that happened today was really lawyers who showed up at, for example, the Central Police Station were told categorically that there would be no discussion of release or bail until after 6 p.m. So really what we see is a pattern of detaining suspects until nightfall. and lawyers were very frustrated today. I think the other concern that we've seen in the context of today was really attacks on medical officers. So we saw a tear gassing of a medical facility, an emergency center that's been set up in the center of Nairobi. And we also saw the arrest of a medic by the name of Brandon, who I believe is still in custody as we speak now.
All right, thanks for that. And one of the other things that's coming to the fore is the thing about extrajudicial killings or extrajudicial activities by the police service. And the president yesterday in his address said that under his in his leadership, in his presidency, so to speak, there have been no cases of extrajudicial killings. Is this something that you agree with?
The Missing Voices Alliance continues to document cases of extrajudicial killings even before this round of state violence against protesters. So we would direct his office to that report for scrutiny. And once again, the National Police Service, the Crime Research Bureau, and various other agencies are not producing independent, their own statistics on this issue. So I think the public is inevitably turning to institutions like the Missing Voices Alliance for analysis. What we have been very concerned about for the last week particularly has been the use of live ammunition in many cases against unarmed protests. I mean, these protests really did start as a remarkable display of public participation enshrined within our right to assembly. And it is just so tragic that so many lives, upwards of 23 lives, have been lost in many cases with individuals who were carrying no arms. They were bearing no weapons, but many of them have died. And of course, today we have the tragic story, the really hurtful story of a child that has been shot severally and has died.
All right. And when you talk about the violence, and we've seen cases of people who have infiltrated what are ideally, solid, constitutionally and protected protests. What's your comment on this? Because we've seen goons, people who've taken advantage of this movement to either cause havoc or loot and the likes.
I mean, the scenes that you've just shown of Homa Bay and Eldoret must alarm anybody who believes in the rule of law, believes in a democratic state, believes in a law enforcement, operation that is guided by our laws. To have large numbers, tens of young people walking around with clubs unhindered by the security services is just very worrying. In fact, if there is one thing that I think many of us are beginning to look at more closely is whether we are seeing a return to the fanning of militias or gangs that are able to operate at will simply because they are pro-government. And I think we have to say that, protest is a right under our laws, but it is non-violent protest that is guaranteed. And once protesters begin to express themselves with violent weapons, then we are now seeing something very different from what is envisaged within the right to assembly. So I think we have to be concerned about that. This evening, in the wake of the judicial announcement that the military deployment is lawful, Amnesty International Kenya and the International Commission of Jurists have released 13 guidelines that should guide the military operation. It's on our website and on our social media platforms, as I believe it is also on the International Commission for the International Commission of Jurists website. But one of the things we've said is that we have to call for the withdrawal of all non-uniformed personnel, whether they are military or police. We have to call for the withdrawal of all unmarked vehicles that are being used to deploy, to arrest and to abduct and in some cases detain individuals for many hours at a time. Because in a sense, what we're doing is creating a culture in which we're not able to distinguish which are legitimate law enforcement officers and goons and criminals that are really taking an advantage, either for political interest or secondly, for criminal interest. So I think it is really important at this point that we do not see the emergence of, I guess, what you would call informal plainclothes policing, either by the police service or by the military as they're deployed against civilians. All
right. And just before we close, yesterday there was the somewhat seemingly unique situation where the president had his address. Then within an hour or so, the deputy president also had an address, and which both were addressing this specific issue, but there were points of divergence in regards to what they were saying. And the deputy president made some statements which are quite telling and could be concerning. For instance, when he talks about when he lashed out at the Director General of the NIS for saying that he failed Kenyans. What does this do in terms of the picture it paints for when we have a deputy president who sits on the Security Council but making such an attack, which ultimately almost looked like incriminating his boss of not having his finger on the pulse in terms of what the people want?
In many ways, yesterday left many Kenyans, I suspect, very perplexed. The first was the unprecedented deployment of the Kenya Defense Forces to deal with essentially a civilian issue. And then the night closed essentially with a broadside, an attack on a very senior member of the National Security Council. I think the Amnesty's perspective on this would be, if there was an area that I think we should be looking to apportion blame, it could be on two areas. One is essentially, the design and the implementation or the attempted drafting of a taxation bill that was clearly punitive and repugnant to Kenyans at large. And therefore, the question would be, is it not the Treasury or the Cabinet Secretary in charge of finance that the blame should stop? I mean, it is unprecedented. I think also that, a government and administration has had its taxation bill rejected in such an open and direct way. So is it not the Treasury that should be held accountable for that? As Amnesty International, we are a human rights organization or association of members. Our concern has really been with regards to the type of policing, the violent policing that we've seen. And therefore, the question we would ask is whether it is to the Inspector General that attention should be directed in terms of a need for a change of strategy that would be in line with our laws, and secondly, in line with human rights principles. I think that would be our sense of where we reached as in a situation in terms of perhaps where blame or fault finding should lay.
All right. Thank you very much. And just stay with us. We're going to look into another story here just to give further context to the conversation. And police have arrested 4 people for allegedly taking part in Tuesday's vandalism and arson attack on Kimanis Courier's home in Molo, in the county of Nakuru. Several stolen items have been recovered and returned to the home of the Finance Committee chairperson of the National Assembly, currently being manned by police officers. Ruth Sarmoichesenge has more.
Broken windows on this 2-story mansionette paint a picture of the chaos that ensued on Tuesday evening when Molo residents stormed into Kimanis Courier's home during the 2024 finance bill protests. Tens of demonstrators overwhelmed the police manning the area and made it into the property, destroying kitchenware and stealing valuables of unknown value. The irate residents later burnt part of the poultry house that had 10,000 chicken in it. About 2,000 died in the fire or were stolen by the invaders. Police indicated that 3 cows, each worth 300,000 shillings, have been recovered alive out of the 6 that had been stolen. 1 cow was found slaughtered in the neighborhood. 29 goats that had also been stolen have been recovered. Among other properties destroyed were 3 cars where 2 were burnt and the other one vandalized. Even as police intensify with investigations using the CCTV footage from the house, the Molo MP is yet to issue a statement regarding the ugly incident. One person was arrested a day after 3 people were arraigned at the Molo Law Courts for the burglary. Molo clergy have condemned the incident.
Vile kulifanyika katika nyumba ya MP wetu, kama angesikiza watu wetu, kama angesikiza watu yake, hii mambo hayangeweza kufika kiwango hicho. Vijana tuwe na amani, tutulie, kwa sababu tumeona hakika President wetu Ruto amebadilisha mawazo na akaondoa ile bill. So kile ningewaomba vijana wetu tuweke amani, tujenge Kenya yetu, maana Kenya yetu ni ya maana sana kwa kila mmoja wetu.
Rais alifanya jambo fulani ambalo tunaona alituliza mambo, lakini na rais na yeye angalie isiwe kuna ujanja fulani eti baada ya muda ule mswada urudi utumike.
Back in Molo town, it was business as usual despite the heavy presence of police patrolling the area. Ruth Sarmui Chesenge, NTV.
We'll be revisiting that story in regards to the rich also crying in terms of the human rights aspect with Irungu Houghton after the break. But first, let's take that break. We'll be back.
Tucheze, tusaidie na tushinde. Na ushindi wako kwenye draw ya 30th of this month ni Probox nayo au 750,000 Kenyan shillings. Taslim, dial *570 hash. Chagua option number 4. Tucheze, tusaidie, tushinde.
The moment I feel my pain starting to fade, it's like I'm going back to myself on a really good day.
Panadol Extra releases you from strong pain. Panadol, release starts here.
5 questions, it's Sarah. Hi, guys. Wow, Sarah, your skin is glowing. What beauty soap do you use? I use a beauty soap that keeps my skin soft, moisturized, and protected from germs. But Sarah, the beauty soaps I know don't give germ protection.
Dettol Skincare does. It combines the trusted protection of Dettol with 2 times moisturizers to protect my skin from germs and keeps my skin soft with a beautiful fragrance. Beautiful skin is germ-free skin.
People come to me and they say they get discomfort when they have ice cream. Can you imagine that? Avoiding having cold ice cream. Sensodyne gives you long-lasting protections against sensitivity. And people come in and they're like, oh, it works. I can have ice cream and I'm not in any discomfort. I recommend Sensodyne because it works. It's brilliant.
Enjoy up to 100% asset finance, 0 processing fees, and flexible repay options through our trusted partners. Visit any Family Bank branch countrywide to learn more and get started.
Kikohozi cha muda wowote, kutokwa na jasho kwa wingi usiku, uchungu kwenye kifua, afya kudhoofika, tafuta matibabu. Labda ni TB ni ugonjwa wa kweli. Ukipimwa matibabu yapo utapona. Tibiwa ishi poa. Tibiwa ishi poa.
nothing should come in the way of how you enjoy the game. So ukibet, bet responsibly. Bet na amount unaweza afford. If you need help, speak to a counselor today. Call 0800 724 835.
The moment I feel my pain starting to fade, it's like I'm going back to myself on a really good day.
Panadol Extra releases you from strong pain. Panadol, release starts here.
Welcome back to NTV Tonight, and just before the break there was a story about the damage that has been caused at the house, at the homestead of Kimani, who's the chairman of the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly, basically the man who was steering the Finance Bill 2024 from the National Assembly side. And just as we come to a close, Irungu, you've seen what happened, in Molo, and, it's, where does this fall in terms of, as we agitate for, human rights, etc., from a populace that is feeling disgruntled and angered by the, the actions or inactions of some of the leaders?
Yeah, our laws do not discriminate in terms of individuals. There are not certain laws for rich people, other laws for poor people. Of course, the behavior of states can differentiate in terms of how you respond. For example, as recently we saw the response to people living in Madare and Mukuru and those living in places like Runda. But the law itself is built around the concept of the equality of law. And therefore, I think we have to, at this time, call for the protection of the right to life, the right to property for all people, not just those that we like or that we agree with. And therefore, we have to essentially condemn acts of violence, criminality, and anything that departs from the Bill of Rights that holds us all as equally. I think the other point, Dan, is really that we have to say that even when protesters stop being peaceful, their rights do not disappear. It does not give the right to a KDF officer or a police officer to brutalize a protester, or even worse still, to shoot them in the context of essentially responding to protests. So it is important that we hold the right to life as sacrosanct in all the operations that are happening at the moment in the country, but also that each of us as citizens, as people of this country, respect that right as well. We need to also, I think, begin to ask questions about the military deployment. Who is the commanding officer for the military deployment? Is it what instructions have they been given? Are there mechanisms for public complaints? These were the kind of things that we heard the judge speak about today, and we are looking forward in the next few days to find to listen to how the state will resolve this very strange, unprecedented situation where the Kenya Defence Force is being essentially deployed on civilians, Kenyan civilians. And then lastly, I think we have to call upon the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. The word policing is distinct from police authority, so that they begin to play a role in terms of monitoring and essentially investigating all acts of lawlessness, of police misconduct, and also military misconduct in this process. I think the military deployment is not a license to do away with our laws and essentially the protection of life. So this would be my response to you, Dan.
All right, thank you very much. And Irungu, just in closing, you had mentioned something about the plainclothes police officers and the likes. Have you heard of reports of cases where we have the police officers masquerading as not only, protesters or otherwise? How else are they being reported to be sort of masquerading as they try and monitor the protests?
I mean, many of the arrests and seizures today, which I think everybody has seen on social media and on the mass media, were done by officers that did not have their name tags. There was no service numbers. The police vehicles' license plates were masked or didn't have license plates. And I think we have to say that we are not in a situation where the police and the military have given up the authority to some unknown set of units. They have to operate within the policing guidelines that exist. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is that it's important that police officers remain accountable for their actions and remain lawful under our laws. But also it's important that, citizens are able to distinguish between, being stopped and abducted by criminals and being stopped and, arrested by law enforcement agencies. That distinction has to be made clear for the Republic. Otherwise, we are really in a very dangerous situation where anybody, including some of the militias that we've seen in Homa Bay and Eldoret today, that they themselves can also declare that they're part of the law enforcement agencies. There is a reason why we call the law enforcement agencies disciplined forces. And this is something that the military knows all too well. They have essentially done a lot of peacekeeping work in West Africa and have been known essentially for their discipline. It would be terrible for this to be, this legacy to be destroyed on the streets of our own cities and towns.
Thank you very much, Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, for joining us on NTV tonight for your insights and just your views on what's happening in regards to the protests and the matters around it. And now we take you to the business news now.